I'm Andy Schmuckler. Title of this particular episode is If You Know That Donald Trump Must Lose, You Have But One Sensible Option. That's the title. That's the thesis. Uh, if you're somebody who doesn't know that Donald Trump must lose, I got nothing to say to you right now. We could discuss that, but it, there are a lot of people, I think, particularly on the Republican side, uh, who recognize that Donald Trump's being elected in the next election would be a disaster for the country. I mean, we've got some Republicans, leading Republicans, who have been talking that way, from Liz Cheney and Nikki Haley to Judge Luttig to even Bill Barr, John Kelly, people who are very close to Trump. I mean, there are, and I know some Republicans that I have a friendship with, very good people who know that Donald Trump must lose. I don't feel confident that those people that I know will cast their vote in the only sensible fashion available to us here in Virginia. I'll get to the state by state aspect of it, but there is only one other person who can win the election besides Donald Trump. So if you take as your premise that Donald Trump must lose, because basically that would be a potential death blow to American democracy and everything that we've held sacred about what this country represents. We could lose it all. So I think that any sensible person in America should understand that Donald Trump must lose. I recognize that not everybody will. But if you do, then it follows that the only sensible option is to vote for the only other person that might win the election to be president of the United States. I'm hearing stuff that tells me not a whole lot of stuff, but enough that I get the impression that there are a lot of Republicans who might know that Donald Trump must lose, but who will say, but I couldn't vote for Biden. Now, whatever underlies the couldn't vote for Biden, and I think it's probably mostly nonsense, because when I see what the Republicans seem to believe about Biden, and I have a correspondence with a Republican who shows me something about what even the most sane and moderate people who are on the Republican side think about Biden. I mean, like they thought about Obama too. It's sort of incredible. Obama, I am very critical of, but he was perhaps one of the most decent human being ever to occupy the American presidency. I mean, he was an exceptionally decent guy and intelligent too. He blew it in some important ways, but I really think highly of Obama as a man who's really committed to doing good and who's intelligent about how to go about it and what doing good would mean. Got good values. During those years living out here in Republican Shenandoah Valley, I knew that they saw him, 20% of Republicans saw him as the Antichrist. Well, Biden has been subject to the same degree of irresponsible vilification as was Hillary, as was Obama, as was Clinton, Demonization has been what this Republican Party has been doing for more than a generation. The last Democratic president not to be treated as if he had no right to the office, not to be demonized, was Jimmy Carter, who left the White House at the beginning of 1981. It's been that long. It took Trump to get to the point where where you don't even recognize that they won the election. But there is already a kind of a demonization, delegitimization. That's what the birther lie was about. They delegitimized Obama with the birther lie, and they delegitimized Biden with the stolen election lie. Get over it. Whatever you think of Biden, not only are you likely to have been deceived and manipulated by the information bubble on the right, but if you actually understand what the kind of threat that Donald Trump represents, his defeat becomes the essential thing, whatever that takes. And there's only one thing it can take, that it does inevitably take, is it takes a victory by Joe Biden. So you can hate him and you despise him, but with Biden, at least you know that in 2028, we'll have another presidential election. Biden won't be running. He'll have already served 2 terms. And we will have a chance for American democracy to continue to function. Whereas if Trump wins, it's not too far-fetched that if he hasn't fallen apart by 2028, he simply will call off the election or do what Putin does to make his victory inevitable. He's already shown he's not willing to let go of power. And he's been telling us what he's planning to do in the second term, and it's all in the fascist playbook. So it's democracy versus fascism, and there's only one way that democracy wins, and that's with Joe Biden getting the majority of the electoral college and having as big of a victory as possible, I might add. But the defeat of Trump being essential, the only way he gets defeated must be achieved. And so the only sensible option is to vote for Joe Biden. He doesn't represent whatever you might think, he doesn't represent a threat to anything fundamental. He's actually been a pretty good president and done pretty well running an administration. But even if you don't believe that, we've survived lousy presidents before. We haven't survived any fascist dictators. So what I'm talking about here basically could be also restated. It would be irresponsible to cast your vote for any third-party candidate. We have a 2-party system. You could set up a democracy to work differently and end up with a multi-party system like some other democracies have. But we have a 2-party system, and the candidate of one of the 2 major political parties, virtually without exception, is the one that's going to win the power of the office that's at stake. If Trump has got to lose, then there are 3 possibilities. You can vote for Trump against the interests of the survival of American democracy. You can vote for Biden to try to get one more vote on the side of having Biden win a second term and preside over the continuation of American democracy and the rule of law. With Trump, who's tried to avoid having the rule of law hold him to account, actually having to go to trial. Or you can vote for a third party candidate, which is basically the equivalent of not voting. And it's the equivalent of giving Biden, let's see, how does this work? The arithmetic was clear to me a few minutes ago. It's something like a half vote or something like that. You're hurting Trump half as much if you vote for a third party candidate, half as much as you could. So you have not made a priority out of defeating Donald Trump. Voting for the only other guy who could possibly win. Rather than throwing your vote away and leaving it for everybody else to decide whether Trump or Biden gets the powers of the presidency. Now, because we have the electoral system, which I really wish that we did not, but we do, there's a footnote or an exception or codicil or whatever to that statement. If we had a straight national popular vote for the presidency, there wouldn't be this alternative. It would still be true that you should not think about voting for a third party at all when the survival of the whole system is on the line here and only one candidate can save it. And it isn't a third party candidate. Back in 2000, because people didn't think sensibly, or back then, more plausibly than today, because people didn't understand that Ralph Nader was dead wrong and probably really knew that he was at least a lot wrong when he said there's not a dime's worth of difference between George W. Bush and Al Gore. Unless you actually believe that there wasn't really any difference, which I think would have been stupid to believe. If there were a popular vote, there would be no excuse ever in a situation where much is at stake between the two national parties to vote for a third party candidate. Not if there's anything really substantial at stake. And back in 2000, I wrote a piece back then about, and got word through somebody connected with my family that was to Ralph Nader, warning that he might be responsible for the country taking a turn in a direction which is exactly contrary to the direction that he, Ralph Nader, wanted it to go. Because Al Gore would have been very different. I didn't know just how different, but if Al Gore had been elected president, we would not have had the war in Iraq. Full stop. We would not have had the war in Iraq, and a lot would have been different and better because of it. But Ralph Nader insisted on telling people that there wasn't a dime's worth of difference and getting people to vote for him. And as it happened, if you look at the vote in Florida, where the election got decided in 2000 by mere a few hundred votes, and by the Supreme Court, I may add, in a very ugly partisan decision. 96,000 people, if I remember the number, voted for Ralph Nader. And if they had voted and said, for which of the two people that had a chance of winning the presidency would you prefer, the overwhelming majority of that at 96,000 would have voted for Al Gore. And the election in Florida would have been pretty close, but not all that close. Gore would have won. He would have been president. We wouldn't have had a war in Iraq. So go forward a few years, and at that time I was writing, I was appearing in as op-ed pieces in the Christian Science Monitor at regular intervals. And I wrote a piece that was basically addressed to the kind of people who voted for George W. Bush, voted for Ralph Nader, and enabled George W. Bush to become president when it could have gone the other way, because it was such a close election. And I was amazed at what came back at me when I would appear online and articulating some of these things, either in newspaper op-eds like the Christian Science Monitor, or subsequently when I had my own blog about how we got ourselves into the mess that we were in 2005 and 2006. And there was just a lot of resistance on the part of people who had voted for Ralph Nader. Oh, if he had run a good campaign, he would have won. Well, that's true. That's true. If you could make a whole list of ifs that might have shifted enough votes, that Al Gore would have won if this instead of that. That's no way to think. When you have a moral decision to make, all you're responsible for is your choice. And the choice that they made was also one of those, if that something different had happened, and they had it in their control to make a sensible decision. Whereas Al Gore was doing the best he could. He didn't have it in control to be the great political candidate, the FDR or the JFK that would have been able to dominate the race more effectively than a kind of more leaden fellow of the good man Al Gore was able to do. Yeah, he could have done it if he'd been somebody different, but you play the game to the best of your ability. The fact that I didn't score 30 points a game on the high school team is because I wasn't that good of a shot. I would have been delighted to score 30 points. I was lucky to break into double digits now and then. I just wasn't a good shot. Al Gore wasn't a great candidate. Ralph Nader and his voters, they had choices. I think Ralph Nader disgraced himself. And I don't know what Cornel West is up to. And I don't think RFK Jr. is anybody to follow in any way. And that's what his family says, too. I know that people vote for a whole lot of reasons, and I actually think that Joe Biden and today's Democratic Party are worthy of pretty enthusiastic support. They've been too blind and too weak for too long, but they're out there fighting hard now, and they deserve the support of every American patriot in this election. But I've been engaged in discussions on my website and elsewhere with enough liberals to know that there are a lot of people who think about the politics in a way which leaves the Democrats looking worse and Biden looking worse. Like my Republican friends that I was talking about, just forget about it. If you're a Republican, but you believe in preserving American democracy, hold your nose as much as you need to vote for a Democrat or vote in particular for Joe Biden, but do it. It's the only sensible choice. Your country needs you to do what you can do to save American democracy. There's only one thing to do. Don't be pointing at all the other things. If he had only this or if he had only that. The choice is between democracy and dictatorship, and you got to vote for. You have to vote for democracy. Don't have to think about it as voting for Biden. By a set of circumstances, I would say to these Republicans, Joe Biden is the champion of the Constitution that you have always said you revered, the American system, with liberty and justice for all, the rule of law. Joe Biden is what represents that. Vote for that. Forget about the guy. He'll be gone in 4 more years anyway. The important thing is that the system survives. Now, if you live in a state where the outcome is really, really not uncertain, too many negatives maybe, you know what's going to happen. Because we do have an electoral system, that means that, say, in California, with its huge pile of electoral votes, represents more than 10% of the population of the country, I believe. Like 40 million is more than 10% of 333 million, something like that. I think we can say with almost zero uncertainty that California is going to be carried by Joe Biden. In that situation, it's not morally irresponsible to vote for a third-party candidate. I would argue that let's make him look as strong as possible so that we can maybe get this Trump force off the stage, more or less for good this time. Leave it on the mat as much as possible so that it doesn't raise its head again in some kind of insurrection. It doesn't raise its head again in some kind of big lie, and it doesn't raise its head again. Let's minimize that. But if you have a real hankering to say something to the nation by how you vote, that Biden doesn't capture what your really ideal sense of things is, and Cornel West shows that you really support something you characterize differently. All right, I would do, but if you are in a state where there's any real possibility it could go either way, and I don't know what percentage probabilities you would have to assign to it before you say it's a negligible possibility. But I live in Virginia, and Virginia, I think, in a slight freak, went Republican in 2021. I think it is under normal circumstances, it will be a blue state now. That's my assessment of it. But that 2021 election took place at a nadir of the standing of Democrats. A few months earlier, a few months later, and the Democrats would have carried that state again, and we wouldn't have this terrible Governor Youngkin. But that means that the state is still purple in that events can change things. So I think that for a Virginian in our electoral system, where it's winner take all, you got to vote for Biden if you want to preserve, if you know that Trump must lose. I may write an op-ed piece about this. I get to have a piece in 2 of the main papers of the very red congressional district that I ran for Congress in 2011, 2012. So I have access to a readership that is predominantly Republican. And I'm going to guess that there are 20 to 25%. I don't. It's just a guess, really. Um, I don't think it's like the 40% that voted for Nikki Haley up in New Hampshire. This isn't New Hampshire. This is more true believer country than New Hampshire, live free or die. But I'm guessing that my friends represent maybe 20, 25% of Republicans who know that Trump must lose, that can see that what he represents is antagonistic to everything that in their patriotism they've been proud of about this country. I don't know if I'm right about, that they see Trump as that kind of threat. I think that part of the job of this campaign is to get them to see this kind of a threat, and maybe this op-ed can be part of my effort to use that audience, that platform, to get that 20% to see that this is in fact the choice. That's a lot of people. That's enough to, if it happens sort of like on a national basis, if 20% of Republicans can hold their nose in whatever way they need and vote for a Democrat, the election could hinge on that. And in these battleground states, the moral responsibility is you vote for Biden. If you believe in America. And then the people on the left who like to talk about voting their conscience. Well, I'll tell you about my conscience. My conscience is formed on a morality that I describe as, I didn't invent the word, but consequentialist. In other words, what makes something right or wrong has a whole lot to do with, and I'm not sure if it's altogether it has to do with, or just a whole lot to do with, what are the consequences? In other words, to ask yourself, what can I do that would maximally help the world to become all it ideally could be, should be? That's what's good to do, is to do the best of the available options in terms of making the human world better. That's my morality. So when I vote my conscience, I don't look at, does Ralph Nader represent my values about how GM should deal with a problem they know that exists in the Ford Pinto, or that the Chevy Corvair is dangerous at any speed? No, I ask myself, what can I do so that I maximize the chance that the world will evolve in a better direction? And that means that even if Al Gore might be, which I don't know that he particularly was, but the Democrats are getting more and more in bed with the corporate system, as labor unions, as the people were being moved back and back, and the labor was losing power. And so the Democrats, in order to compete, found that they couldn't turn to labor to countervail the power of the corporate system. And so corporate money was buying more and more of the Democratic Party. Yeah, that was all happening in the 1980s and 90s, say. And Al Gore was part of that Democratic Party. But he was willing to take a stand for us to act responsibly about climate change. That was where his heart was. Conscience says, vote for Al Gore. That way we'll be better able to respond to the challenge of climate change, which makes the world better, and will not take the step that upsets the entire international order when the leader of the free world, the creator of the international order of post-World War II, invades another sovereign nation in Iraq, probably for imperialistic purposes. Something changes in the world for the worse. I think helping to lead to some of what we're dealing with from Putin over the last 15 years. The United States just tore a hole in the international order, and why was Putin going to be controlled by it? Big difference between electing Al Gore. And the difference is measured in terms of the better world versus the worse world. And my conscience says, if you're going to vote that conscience, you vote for the guy who can win, to make sure that the guy who's going to take us on some destructive paths doesn't get the powers of the presidency. I do wish that we had a straight popular vote, and then every single American would have to make exactly that moral decision. But we got battleground states, and I don't like the way the rest of us become irrelevant. I would like the whole country to get educated in the right ways about what's at stake here. But at least in a half dozen states, there's going to be a battle to show as much of the electorate as possible that Donald Trump must be defeated, and to get as much of the electorate as possible, Republicans, Democrats, and folks more on the left or fringe, to realize that a real vote of conscience, if you hold my kind of morality, a real vote of conscience is going to be for Joe Biden, our inevitable champion in the battle between democracy and fascism. Thank you. I probably will be back in not too long. I might be talking about some of the people I really admire who are giving us commentaries these days about important parts of the battle that's being fought. They will be Paul Krugman, Andrew Weissman, and Timothy Snyder. Krugman on a whole lot of things about the dynamics of the partisan struggle, but especially the economics. Yeah, funny things. Andrew Weissman, because so many of our battles are being fought through the legal system, the judiciary, he's really outstanding in clarifying how things are unfolding and what things are at stake and where things might go in those dramas. And Timothy Snyder, he's the deepest of them all. He has the deepest understanding of the fascistic, tyrannical force that can work in the world. He wrote Bloodlands about how between Stalin and Hitler, so many millions of people were slaughtered one way and another through famine and through Nazi killings. And then now he's talking about the fascism of Vladimir Putin and the war in Iraq, in Ukraine, and the political struggle between democracy and fascism in America today. These three guys, I'll be back to talk about. Let me just get something hot to drink to soothe this throat of mine. Thanks for listening, if in fact you are. This is a really weird medium not to know, just who's listening, but I'll be back and give you some more of the best